Let me tell you something most people never realize about avoidant personalities. They live their entire life behind a carefully constructed mask. On the outside, they can look confident, collected, untouchable. They walk into relationships with an aura that says, I don't need anyone. I'm fine on my own. But underneath that mask lies something very different, an ocean of vulnerability they've spent years, sometimes decades, trying to protect. And this is exactly where the fear of the super empath comes in. See, a super empath is not ordinary. They're not just compassionate or kind. They carry an extraordinary emotional intelligence, a sixth sense for human behavior. They read silence like it's a book. They notice micro expressions most people would miss. They pick up on contradictions, the subtle mismatch between what someone says and what they actually feel. And when they lock eyes with an avoidant, they see straight through the facade. That's the problem. The mask that's worked on everyone else doesn't work on them. Imagine spending your whole life perfecting a role, rehearsing the script of detachment, only to meet someone who can improvise with your soul. That is terrifying, because when the super empath looks at an avoidant, they don't just see the person standing in front of them. They see the child that person used to be. The child who once craved love and security, but was met with inconsistency, rejection, or pain. The empath sees the wound that created the defense, and suddenly the avoidant is exposed. Now here's where it gets interesting. Exposure is the one thing an avoidant cannot handle. Their entire nervous system is wired to protect them from intimacy, because intimacy feels like danger. When someone sees through the mask, the avoidant feels naked, powerless, unprotected. They don't know how to manage that kind of vulnerability. And the empath's ability to see through them creates an internal war. On one hand, they crave being known at that level. On the other hand, being known is exactly what they fear. Think about it, most relationships allow the avoidant to stay in control. They can create distance, they can keep secrets, they can maintain the illusion of independence. But a super empath dismantles all of that without even trying. Not by manipulation, not by force, but by presence. Just by existing in the relationship, they hold up a mirror that says, I see you, all of you, and I'm not afraid of what's underneath. And when someone isn't afraid of their truth, the avoidant loses the only power they've ever had, the power of hiding. This is why avoidants often feel such a magnetic pull toward empaths while simultaneously resisting them. It's a paradox. The very thing they fear is the very thing they crave. They want to be seen. They want to be loved for who they truly are, not just the image they project. But the moment that love appears, it feels like standing under a spotlight with no place to run. The empath forces the avoidant to confront a reality they've been avoiding. The mask was never protection. It was a prison. And here's the truth that rattles them to the core. The super empath doesn't just break through their defenses. They break the illusion that distance keeps them safe. They reveal that true safety doesn't come from hiding. It comes from being known. That revelation terrifies the avoidant because it means their entire strategy for surviving relationships has been built on a lie. And nobody wants to face the fact that the very walls they built for protection are the same walls keeping them from love. So when you wonder why avoidants fear the love of a super empath, understand this: it's not the love itself they fear. It's the exposure. It's the rawness of being seen when they've spent their entire life running from themselves. The empath isn't dangerous, but the truth they reveal is. And that truth is impossible to forget once it's been shown. And here's what you need to take away. When someone sees through your mask, you have two choices. You can run and reinforce the prison you've been living in, or you can face the fear, drop the facade, and finally taste what real connection feels like. Avoidants run, but deep down, they know. They will never escape the eyes of the one who saw them for who they really are. One of the greatest paradoxes of the avoidant personality is this: they fight for freedom, But when they actually taste the kind of freedom a super empath offers inside love, it terrifies them. Most people don't understand this dynamic because we've been conditioned to believe that love is supposed to come with rules, expectations, and strings attached. But the super empath plays a different game. Their love isn't about possession, it's about presence. They don't need to cage you to feel secure. They don't demand constant proof, they don't cling, they don't chase. Their love breathes, it allows space. It says, I see you, I honor who you are, and I don't need to control you to keep you. Now to an avoidant, this should feel like paradise. No pressure, no emotional handcuffs, no suffocating dependency. But here's where the twist happens. Instead of peace, it creates panic. Why? Because it strips away the excuses the avoidant has built their entire life around. See, the avoidance defense mechanism is to tell themselves, I can't be close because closeness traps me. I can't give my heart fully because love means losing freedom. They justify distance by equating intimacy with control. But when a super empath comes along and offers love that doesn't control, the entire foundation of that defense collapses. Think about that for a moment. If the reason you've been running your whole life is because you believe love equals suffocation, what happens when someone proves you wrong? You're left with no place to hide. You can't blame the other person anymore. You can't say, they were too needy, they wanted too much from me. The super empath disarms every excuse. And now the avoidant has to face the truth that the prison wasn't created by other people. It was built in their own mind. That is a terrifying realization because freedom inside of love exposes them to something deeper than control. It exposes them to responsibility. If they are free and no one is chaining them, then what's stopping them from showing up fully? Nothing but their own fear. That's the exact confrontation avoidants try to avoid at all costs. What's fascinating is that the super empath doesn't even need to lecture or demand this realization. Their mere way of loving does it. Their consistency, their emotional independence, their ability to give space while still being deeply connected. It dismantles the avoidance illusions one by one. And the avoidant feels that dismantling not as liberation, but as a threat to their identity. Because who are they without the story that closeness equals captivity? Who are they if freedom and intimacy can actually exist together? This is where the fear truly kicks in. The avoidant has been living in a binary world, freedom or love, independence or intimacy, self-preservation or vulnerability. But the empath presents a third path, one they never considered: freedom inside intimacy. That idea is almost unthinkable because it forces them to challenge the deepest programming of their nervous system. It's like asking someone who's always lived in darkness to open their eyes to light for the first time. It doesn't feel comfortable. It feels blinding. And here's the deeper truth. What the avoidant really fears is not the empath's love, but their own potential. They fear what would happen if they surrendered to it. Because if they gave themselves permission to step into a love that allows freedom, it would shatter their old identity. They would have to become someone new, someone who doesn't hide, someone who doesn't run, someone who is capable of being both free and deeply connected. And that level of transformation feels like death to the old self. That's why they resist. That's why they fear. But here's the irony: the very thing they run from is the thing their soul has been craving all along. Every human being, no matter how avoidant, carries the desire to be loved without conditions, to be free yet deeply bonded, to be fully seen yet fully accepted. The super empath offers exactly that. And that's why their love isn't just attractive, it's destabilizing. So if you ever wonder why an avoidant pushes back against the one person who gives them the most freedom, understand this: it's not rejection of the love, it's rejection of the responsibility that comes with it. Because once they realize love can be both free and safe, they can no longer hide behind excuses. They have to confront the truth that what they've been running from was never love. It was themselves. And here's the reflection I want to leave you with. When love doesn't bind you but frees you, you are standing face to face with the kind of connection that has the power to transform your life. The only question is whether you will keep running from it or finally allow yourself to step into the freedom that only true love can give. There's a reason why the super empath shakes the very core of an avoidant. They act as a mirror that cannot be escaped. Not a mirror that reflects surface beauty, but one that reveals what lies beneath, the insecurities, the contradictions, the buried emotions. And that mirror is merciless, not because the empath wants to expose the avoidant, but because their presence naturally reflects truth. Avoidants spend most of their lives running from their inner world. They've built patterns of avoidance for a reason. Somewhere in their history, closeness equaled pain. Intimacy meant disappointment. Vulnerability was punished, ridiculed, or abandoned. So they developed a strategy: disconnect, detach, stay in control. It's not malicious, it's survival. But here comes the empath, and suddenly survival mode starts to malfunction. Why? Because every act of kindness, every ounce of patience, every demonstration of genuine care forces the avoidant to see themselves in a light they cannot escape. The empath doesn't need to argue. They don't need to force anything. Just by being who they are, consistent, emotionally aware, deeply connected, they show the avoidant something uncomfortable: the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. When the avoidant says, "I don't need anyone," the empath's love silently whispers back, "But I see how badly you do." When the avoidant insists, "I'm fine," the empath's intuition catches the flicker in their eyes, the hesitation in their voice, and knows the truth: they're not fine. That reflection is brutal. Imagine looking in the mirror every day and realizing you can't keep lying to yourself. That's what happens when an avoidant is loved by a super empath. Their emotional defenses start to crumble, not because they want them to, but because the empath's mirror makes the truth undeniable. And here's the catch: humans crave truth and run from it at the same time. The avoidant feels both pulled toward this reflection and panicked by it. It's like standing in front of a mirror that doesn't just show your face, but your entire soul. For most people, that's enlightening. For the avoidant, it's overwhelming, because every reflection carries with it a question they don't want to answer. Am I living as the person I was meant to be, or am I just surviving as the person I had to become? That's a terrifying question. And the empath is the one who puts it in front of them again and again, without even speaking it out loud. This is why avoidants often feel a strange mix of admiration and resentment toward the super empath. They admire the strength, the openness, the fearlessness of someone who can stand in love without collapsing. But they resent the fact that this very strength highlights their own weakness. The empath holds up a mirror that says, "You could be this free, this connected, this authentic, if only you stopped running." And that's a truth the avoidant doesn't know how to handle. Here's the philosophical depth of it: mirrors don't create flaws, they reveal them. The empath doesn't make the avoidant broken. They simply reflect what's already there. But most people don't want to see themselves unfiltered. They prefer distortion, masks, shadows. The empath offers no distortion. They are clarity in human form. And clarity is terrifying when you've built your whole life around hiding. But here's what makes this reflection so powerful. Once you've seen yourself in that kind of mirror, you can't unsee it. The avoidant may try to run, to distract, to bury themselves in distance, but the reflection follows them. It lingers in their mind, in their body, in their dreams. Because truth, once revealed, becomes a seed. And no matter how much the avoidant tries to resist, that seed grows. So the empath is both their greatest fear and their greatest chance at freedom. Fear, because the reflection feels unbearable. Freedom, because it's the only way they'll ever break out of their own prison. The avoidant doesn't realize it at first, but the mirror they're running from is the mirror they need most. And this is where I want you to reflect. The people who truly see us are the ones we often resist the hardest. But those mirrors aren't punishments. They are invitations. Invitations to stop living as a fragmented version of ourselves and step into the wholeness we've been avoiding all along. One of the deepest fears an avoidant carries is the fear of abandonment. On the surface, they may appear indifferent, detached, even cold. But underneath that exterior is a raw wound. The belief that no matter how good something feels, no matter how much they love, it will eventually be taken away. That's the hidden script running their lives. And so, to protect themselves, they often do the unthinkable. They abandon first. They create distance before the other person can. They close their hearts before they can be broken. But here's the paradox. When they encounter the love of a super empath, that strategy begins to fall apart. Because the empath doesn't play by the same rules. The empath doesn't abandon. They don't storm out at the first sign of conflict. They don't weaponize silence or punish with rejection. Their presence is steady, consistent, almost unnerving in its stability. And that stability has a way of triggering something profound in the avoidant. For the first time, the avoidant comes face to face with their greatest fear, not by experiencing abandonment, but by realizing they might lose the one person who refuses to abandon them. It sounds contradictory, but think about it when you've spent your life expecting people to leave, and you finally meet someone who doesn't. The fear doesn't vanish. It intensifies, because now the stakes are higher. This love is rare. This love is unlike anything they've known. And if they push it away, if they lose it, they know deep down they may never find anything like it again. That's not just fear. That's panic. The empath's unwavering presence forces the avoidant to recognize something they've avoided their entire lives, the possibility of permanent loss. Not loss because the empath will run, but loss because the avoidant's own patterns could destroy the very thing they need most. And once they realize that, they're caught in a devastating tension, longing for love while simultaneously fearing the responsibility of keeping it. Now let's break this down on a psychological level. Abandonment wounds are primal. They're often rooted in childhood experiences. Parents who were inconsistent, caregivers who were physically present but emotionally absent, situations where love felt unpredictable or conditional. That wiring doesn't just disappear in adulthood. It manifests in adult relationships, where the avoidant becomes both the victim and the architect of their own isolation. The very thing they fear, being left, is the very thing they unintentionally recreate by pushing people away. But here's where the empath changes the equation. Their love doesn't trigger abandonment. It triggers awareness. It shows the avoidant that abandonment isn't inevitable, that there is such a thing as stability, loyalty, and presence. And that revelation is both liberating and terrifying. Because if abandonment isn't guaranteed, then the avoidant can no longer use it as justification for keeping people at arm's length. They can no longer say, why bother opening up? They'll just leave anyway. The empath proves that wrong. And now the avoidant must face the deeper fear, the fear of losing something irreplaceable. This is the silent breakdown happening inside the avoidant when they're loved by a super empath. Every day they feel the pull. What if I let this in? What if I risk being vulnerable? What if I actually allow myself to need this person? And with those questions comes the shadow. If I lose them, it will break me. That's the reality they wrestle with. And let's not pretend this is easy. For the avoidant, this isn't just a romantic decision. It's a battle with their very identity. To let love in means admitting that their old strategies no longer work. It means surrendering control, risking pain, and stepping into uncharted territory where the heart, not the defenses, leads the way. That's why the empath feels so dangerous to them. Not because the empath abandons, but because the empath refuses to. So what do we learn from this? That fear of abandonment doesn't vanish when love is constant. It intensifies because now there's more to lose. The empath becomes the mirror that reveals this truth, and the avoidant must decide, will they keep sabotaging out of fear, or will they finally choose to break the cycle? One of the most overlooked truths about avoidance is that their greatest obsession isn't love itself, it's control. They don't just control what they say, they control what they reveal, how much they feel, and when they decide to show up. It's all a carefully constructed system designed to protect them from vulnerability. Distance isn't just a habit, it's a strategy. If they can control the space, they can control the intensity. If they can control the timing, they can control the risk. And as long as they are in control, they believe they are safe. But here's where the super empath disrupts the entire system, because you cannot control someone who does not play by your rules. You cannot manipulate someone who is not desperate for your validation. You cannot intimidate someone who sees through the mask. The empath breaks the avoidance control not by force, but by standing so firmly in their own strength that the old strategies don't work anymore. And that terrifies the avoidant, because for the first time, they're confronted with a reality they've spent their whole life avoiding, the reality of powerlessness in love. Let's unpack that. For the avoidant, control is safety. Without it, they feel like they're standing in quicksand, vulnerable, exposed, overwhelmed. But the empath doesn't take that control away through demands, they dismantle it through presence. When the avoidant pulls back, the empath doesn't chase. They hold steady. When the avoidant withholds affection, the empath doesn't beg. They simply give from their own abundance. And when the avoidant tries to dictate the emotional temperature of the relationship, the empath's consistency overrides the game. Suddenly, the avoidant realizes something shocking. The power they thought they had over the dynamic is slipping away. And here's the deeper layer. The avoidant isn't just losing control over the relationship, they're losing control over themselves. Because love has a way of bypassing defenses. It stirs emotions that can't be regulated, feelings that can't be suppressed, longings that break through, no matter how hard they fight. And when those emotions surface in the presence of someone who refuses to be controlled, the avoidant feels both drawn in and destabilized. They've lost the very illusion that's kept them safe for so long, that they are the ones holding the reins. Think about what that means on a philosophical level. Control is an illusion. We think we have it, but the truth is, control often controls us. Avoidants believe they are protecting themselves by staying detached, but what they're really doing is enslaving themselves to fear. The empath doesn't just threaten their control of the relationship, they threaten the very story the avoidant has been living by. And when your story is threatened, your identity feels like it's crumbling. That's why the presence of an empath feels so destabilizing. It shakes the very foundation of who the avoidant thinks they are. But here's the irony. The moment the avoidant realizes they can't control the empath, a strange kind of freedom opens up. Because if they can't manipulate, if they can't dictate, if they can't hide, what's left? Authenticity, vulnerability, real connection. The very things they've been running from are the things they're forced to confront. And as painful as that feels in the moment, it's the only doorway to transformation. The empath becomes the mirror of truth yet again, not just showing the avoidant who they are, but exposing the cost of the control they cling to. The cost is intimacy. The cost is love. The cost is the chance to actually feel alive instead of just surviving. And the more the avoidant tries to hold on to control, the more they realize it's slipping through their fingers. Because control and love cannot coexist. You can have one, or you can have the other, but you can't have both. And this is the breaking point for many avoidants. Some double down, choosing the safety of control even if it means loneliness. Others, rare but powerful, begin to surrender. They realize that in losing control, they're actually gaining something far greater. They're gaining the chance to live, to connect, to experience the kind of love that doesn't trap them but frees them. And that's the paradox. The very thing they fear, losing control, is the only thing that can save them. There comes a moment in every avoidance life when the very love they've been running from begins to awaken them. And it's not a soft awakening. It doesn't arrive gently like the sunrise. It feels more like an earthquake inside their chest. The love of a super empath forces them to see what they've been unwilling to face. That all their distance, all their detachment, all their strategies for staying safe were never about protecting themselves from others. They were about protecting themselves from themselves. The empath doesn't just offer affection. They offer a kind of love that is transformative by its very nature. It's not a love built on dependency or games, but on truth and presence. And here's the paradox: transformation always demands death. The death of the old identity, the death of old patterns, the death of the story they've been telling themselves for years. For the avoidant, that's terrifying, because to step into this kind of love means letting go of the version of themselves that has kept them alive. And the nervous system doesn't know the difference between survival and growth. It only knows that change feels like danger. But the awakening doesn't stop just because it feels dangerous. The empath's love keeps pressing, not through pressure, but through consistency. Day by day, the avoidant feels something they've never allowed themselves to feel before. Possibility. The possibility that intimacy doesn't have to equal suffocation. The possibility that vulnerability doesn't always end in rejection. The possibility that freedom and love can actually coexist. And once that seed of possibility is planted, it becomes almost impossible to unsee. Here's the catch though: possibility is frightening, because it forces a choice. If the avoidant admits that this level of connection exists, then they also have to admit that the life they've been living, the detachment, the running, the endless cycles of escape has been a lie, and lies can be comforting. They give us certainty, even if it's certainty rooted in pain. Truth, on the other hand, is destabilizing. It rips away the illusion and leaves you standing naked with nothing to hide behind. That's why the empath's love doesn't just feel like affection. It feels like a confrontation with destiny. And this is where the avoidant feels the greatest fear of all, the fear of becoming someone new. Because awakening isn't about tweaking behaviors or adjusting habits. Awakening is about transformation at the level of identity. The empath's love challenges them to move from survivor to lover, from controller to connector, from isolated to intimate. That's not just a shift, it's a revolution. And revolutions are messy. But here's the beauty hidden inside the fear: every revolution begins with disruption. Every transformation begins with something or someone that unsettles the old world. The super empath is that disruption. They are the catalyst that awakens the avoidant to a reality that was always possible but never chosen. And while the avoidant may resist, push back, or even run, the awakening has already begun. Once the old self is questioned, it can never fully return. What the avoidant doesn't always realize in the moment is that this awakening is a gift. It may feel like a threat, but it's not. It's an invitation to step into a love that doesn't demand their destruction, but their expansion. A love that doesn't erase who they are, but calls forth who they were always meant to be. The avoidant's deepest fear, the death of the old self, is actually the pathway to their highest freedom. So when the empath's love feels unbearable, when it shakes their identity to the core, when it feels like too much to handle, that's not a signal to run. That's a signal that growth is happening, that the shell is breaking, that something larger is trying to emerge.